Welcome, welcome. It is a Halloween week. We are here today to bring you the Cosmic Doctrine, not esoteric psychotherapy, which is what the screen says right now, which I'll change in a moment, but rather the Cosmic Doctrine. Specifically, we are on Chapter 10. And if you're not familiar with the Cosmic Doctrine, if this is the first time you are checking this out, the Cosmic Doctrine is a keystone work of 20th century esotericism / occultism, whichever word you prefer to use. They both basically mean the same thing. By an author named Dion, who was one of that previous century's prolific writers on the topic. In Chapter 10, we will be covering the awakening of consciousness. So at this point in our journey, we have talked a lot about, we've used an analogy of a solar system and how it's starting to gather pieces together around itself, bearing in mind that this should not be taken literally. We're not literally talking about a solar system, but we are framing our minds to think in a certain way. And now the sun, the heart, the logos, is beginning to awaken. It's beginning to understand that it is a thing which is both a macrocosmic concept, meaning the galaxy above us, the God, etc. He's waking up, and the microcosm, which is our own selves, where we wake up to consciousness, and we begin to look around ourselves and marvel at our hands and our feet and our eyes and other things. So we can consider that to be us as babies, staring at our hands in the crib, or we can also attribute that maybe to once you start learning certain things or getting into certain studies, your consciousness awakening could be also attributed to this. There might be other ways that will attribute that. But without further ado, I will hand this over to David, who's in his best Gandalf the Grey. I think, is it Gandalf the Grey?
Yeah, pretty much.
He's doing a good job of that for Halloween. I'm dressed up as myself, so that's scary. Scary enough. All right, David, take it away.
All right. Well, I'll start with a little story here, and then you can chime in at the end, Chris, and tell me if this is the same for you. So when I started, I've been reading John Michael Greer's blog for, I don't know, close to 10 years now. And when he started doing the Cosmic Doctrine, I wasn't sure that I was interested in it, honestly. It was written by a Christian mystic. I was like, yeah, I'll like skim the articles that he writes on the various different chapters, because he was doing them once a month. And it was actually this chapter, where he started talking about stuff that I skimmed it, and I said, wait a minute. This is like in the previous chapters, we're talking about a lot of high level stuff, right? The creation of the cosmos, these great entities, and then the solo logos. This is where we start talking more a little bit more about ourselves and our understanding of what consciousness is. And it was this blog post on this chapter, which actually we're going to do two chapters, 10 and 11, because 11's like a page, that I skimmed it and I said, whoa, I need to go back and read this again. And I went back and read the whole thing rather than skimming it. And then I read it again. And that's when I finally was like, okay, I need to actually buy this book and read it, because things are starting to get very interesting. I feel like in this chapter is where things really start rolling here. I don't know what did you think, Chris, when you got to this particular chapter? Is this also for you where it started rolling, or you're more interested in a little bit further along?
It's been a little bit. I don't remember the exact chapter. It was very slow at first, the first time I read it, because this was actually, it's not my first type of book that I've read like this, but I had gone a period of time where I could just read an entire book from cover to cover and just and chew on it and move on. This type of book, you can't really do that, so you have to like read not even a chapter sometimes just like a few paragraphs, and you have to read them several times over to really get them. There was a point in the book where it starts picking up to the point where I couldn't put it down, where then it started going really fast. Like I was excited to get into it, and it might have been, it's around the middle, so it could be around this portion where it starts to get really, really interesting.
Yeah, so we'll start here with one of the things that Dion Fortune started to do in the last chapter and gets much more heavily into this chapter is we're shifting metaphors. So the previous metaphors were kind of more science based. Now we're starting to get into more psychological metaphors when we start talking about consciousness, um, and that is very deliberate on Dion Fortune's part, because the uh, one of the things that John Michael Greer opens up with is a joke that from Buckminster Fuller, where he says nature has to call an interdepartmental meeting anytime a kid throws a stone into a lake, right? And if we think about it, the divisions that exist within disciplines, within psychology, within science, within everything, are for our benefit, right? Nature has no need of those things. It doesn't need to think, oh, well, how does physics work in this? How does chemistry work in this? How does it just happens, right? And so those divisions are man-made things to help us understand very complex interactions. And that's important to note here because we're going to start getting into much more complex interactions here. And one of the things that I always think about when we get to this part specifically is that um, back in the Renaissance, there were sort of three uh, growths of understanding that were coming up. There was scientific advancement. There was a very big religious movement, and there was a very big esoteric / occult movement. And what ended up happening is that the science and the religion sort of ganged up on the occult and just sort of pounded it into the ground to say, this is garbage. It's either science or it's religion. This occult thing that kind of tries to bridge the gap, that's garbage. It's you don't need to pay attention to that. That's one of the reasons why the occult has such the sinister notion that it has today, is because science and religion sort of ganged up on it to beat it down. Because if you think about it, right, science wants to say that everything's science. The brain, consciousness, that's electrical impulses. It's brain chemistry, right? It's not. They don't want to. They want to really get into the more psychological aspect of what is consciousness, because you then have to start questioning things like, well, where does it come from? And science doesn't have an answer for that. And then on the other side of that, you have the more extreme religious side that says, well, the Bible's a geological. We can trace it back. It only goes back 5,000 years or so because we can follow the genealogy back. Trying to say that the religion is, the Bible is all that it is, right? And I'd like to think that most people nowadays realize that there's some wiggle room between those two, right? That it's not all or one. There is a blending of the two, and that's largely what the esoteric tries to do. Is it tries to blend those two, and that's. Sorry, Chris.
I said yeah.
Yeah. And that's largely what Dion Fortune is starting to do in this chapter.
And it's also important to note on that topic, and it does actually relate into this book, exoteric versus esoteric thought. The exoteric thought is that what you're receiving should be taken literally. That we take what we receive as literal, and that means the Bible is literally happened. Everything in there is that is like a recounting of a historical events, right? God did this, and this person lived here and did these things, etc., etc. And that same thing can apply to Freemasonry as well. When you receive degrees, you go through a thing, and you can take it exoterically. And there's a lot. It's really awesome, like the morals and whatnot you receive should be listened to. The lesson should be listened to at a surface level, but it's underneath the surface that all these writings operate at their strongest current. So you want to. It's there's more, and Dion Fortune starts to get into that as well in this book, I think. where there is what you take for granted as the surface, right? The surface of the river, the surface of the lake, or the ocean, whatever. That thing goes deep, and that's what we're starting to explore here.
Yeah. Um, and that's one of it, from Dion Fortune's viewpoint, to be an occultist was to deal with the places where mind affects matter and matter affects mind, where those two uh, disciplines mix with each other. Uh, and Dion Fortune was very she practiced what she preached. She was, as we've said many times before, she was a Christian mystic. Every Sunday you'd find her at church, but she also encouraged the study of the sciences, because she thought as an occultist you need to understand both sides of things to create, to find that third path. And so, uh, now that's not to say that, one of the traps that could be laid there is that the occultists don't necessarily have all the answers either, um, right? They're just a little more open to the idea of moving one way or the other,
Sometimes.
and
Sometimes.
sometimes,
So that's also a great point. Yes, an esoteric does not have all the answers. In fact, it is true that an esoteric may have none of the right answers, that they are off in their own weed patch somewhere of whatever it is that they're into. But a lot of them can also get stuck into dogma just as much as an exoteric religious person might get stuck into the dogma of their teachings. So that's something else we want to avoid, is that dogma, like remaining flexible to the various paths that exist, and understanding you have to be super skeptical about everything. And just because someone says they're an esoteric doesn't mean they have answers to anything, really. It just means that they're interested in digging into some places that maybe the normal person doesn't.
yeah. And again, that's one of I think I may have mentioned it before. One of the reasons that I like John Michael Greer is that when he writes his books, he changes things. Even if it's the same ritual, he will change things because he doesn't want there to be a dogma. He doesn't want there to be, well, John Michael Greer said to do it this way. He deliberately says it different ways, because he believes, and as I do, that there are different paths, there are different ways to reach the goals that we all want to do. There is no one right way or one wrong way. There are many different ways that we can find that information and reach those goals. Um, and so, uh, hold on, Tansy. There you go. Sorry. So at this stage, we're starting to talk about the solar logos here, which is, as far as we are concerned, as far as Dion Fortune was concerned, is the god of this solar system. And the one thing that she mentions here, she talks about the what does she call it? The aura, the sphere of sensation. And this is something that if you had studied occultism back in Dion Fortune's day, she equates with like the aura. And so the aura is sort of a roughly egg-shaped body of subtle energies that surrounds the physical body, and it's a body of consciousness, where the outer surface of it is both a sense organ by which we can perceive consciousness, as well as the way that we project consciousness out. And so for the solar logos, the solar system is its aura, right? It's sphere of influence, and on that sphere of influence are projected all of the things that the solar logos dealt with. So remember, we talked about the 7 planes, we've talked about the 12 rays, and all of those things are projected onto the solar logos aura. And so we start dealing with the relation between the consciousness in the realm of images that are reflected, and I know that Dion Fortune's term for it is epigenesis, and what she and she also mentions it as sort of like a play, like an act, um, and we start dealing with uh, one of the metaphors that we sort of use is uh, moving into a new neighborhood, right? There's all sorts of things about the neighborhood, right? That you meet the neighbors, and there are different places to eat, and you're figuring out the lay of the land and where to shop, and uh, you know these are all the things that exist within that aura. Um, but and this is sort of like the logos and its companion atoms, of which we are one of, right? When we start talking about companion atoms or the divine spark, that's the very beginnings of our soul. And so when the solar logos settled into its orbit, right, all these atoms which are us came with it. And atoms that are not us as well. There's a lot more than just us that got swept along there. And so uh, there's all this interplay. Um, and when we, once again thinking back to uh, the ring chaos, right? The thing we talked before about how things settle into an equilibrium, and then as it shifts again, everything gets upended and starts colliding with each other and creating complexity. So the when the companion atoms have kind of settled in long before the solar logos has finished brooding over its experiences, they find ways to play, to interact. And this is what's referred to as the first phase of the logoidal evolution, this epigenesis, which is an interesting part where we get to this because it's a creation that is not necessarily of the solar logos, um, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment. So you have the solar logos who's brooding over its experiences that it went through, right? Because it was created in the central stillness. It passed through the 12 rays and the 7 planes, uh, and what happens is that sort of becomes uh, it's thinking about those things, and that slowly becomes, I guess you could say, the subconscious of the solar logos. And because it's something that impacted the solar logos, when the solar logos creates its aura of influence, uh, those things are also imprinted upon the aura. So when we talk about, when we're talking about, oh well, the 12 rays kind of align to the 12 signs of the zodiac, and the 7 planes sort of align to the 7 planes of existence. Uh, these aren't the actual 12 rays. These aren't the actual 7 planes. These are reflections of it as felt by the solar logos. And what happens then is that all of these things settle into the solar logos, and then they affect everything within its sphere of influence, right? So that's why we are affected by the 7 planes of existence and the 12 rays. Is that's a mirror, right? A echo of what the solar logos went through. And so that's sort of the second phase of the epigenesis of the solar logos, is that the things that it experienced start to get imprinted upon its sphere of influence. And then as the third phase begins, the solar logos begins to reflect on the solar system around it. It has been conscious of the cosmos then it's conscious of itself. Now it's becoming conscious of its surroundings. And it's starting to differentiate between subject and object. And since its broodings are reflected outward in the aura, the cosmic atoms that are within that are also reflecting this and starting to perceive themselves as subjects and other things as objects. This is very, very important. As Chris sort of talked about earlier, when when you are a small child and start to look at yourself, right, and differentiate between, everything is a world and, oh, this is me and that is that, right? It's a very big change in the consciousness here. So now the Solar Logos is contemplating the things within its sphere of influence. Do you have something to add there, Chris?
No, I was just going to say, so then also there's reactions, which is what which even animals, etc., do, but there's the memory of the things that cause those reactions, and that's what starts to get built on. Otherwise, if every time you would just react to something and forget about what happened, what caused you to react, then every reaction would be new to you. But that's how our behaviors start to get built in, is we start to remember things that happened, and we start to and how we reacted to them, and those start to form our personality. So we're talking about the awakening of consciousness. And so the awakening of consciousness is this collection of memories, that forge what our personality is, and also influence how we're going to react in the future.
Yep, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a moment here. And as Chris said, it's important to remember that none of this takes place in a vacuum, right? There's all these different things constantly interacting with each other, and the influences from outside, where you have all these other logoses on the different planes as they're passing around and eclipsing the central stillness, the 12 rays. As the logos starts to awaken to objective consciousness, it no longer becomes directly aware of these things. These things start to become, as I said earlier, like the subconscious of the Solar Logos. And I always kind of think of it as like breathing, right? If you focus on it, like I can control my breathing necessarily, but for the most part, it's something that's just in the background. It's not something that I'm focusing on. I'm concentrating on. It's a subconscious action of my body, and that's sort of how I think of the logos in dealing with all the things that affected it before. It's now becoming much more interested in the things that are happening around it. Now, it's not, it's not suppressing these things either. So it's in the same way that those things are becoming the subconscious of the Solar Logos, they're being imprinted as a sort of subconscious on the aura, which affects us. And therefore, our subconscious gets influenced by these things as well. So as all these atoms start to interact with each other, probably the most interesting thing to me when I read this part is that we start talking about creation in the sense that outside of a creation that exists only within the solar system, because the complexity of all of our interactions are things that the Solar Logos was not previously aware of. And as we interact and become more complex, the Solar Logos sees new possibilities open up before it. And this is probably one of the biggest things that I loved about it, because one of the things that I very much disliked about the Roman Catholic Church was this idea of, well, God is all-knowing and all-powerful and all-seeing, and we kind of talked about that a little bit last week or week before, when we're saying that as far as the Sola Logos' sphere of influence is concerned, right, it's pretty damn powerful. But in the grand scheme of things, compared to all the other logoses, it's just a little speck. And what this implies then is that the Sola Logos can learn and grow. So that the Sola Logos is not all-knowing and omnipotent. It is constantly learning new information, learning new possibilities through the interactions of all of the atoms within its sphere of influence, through atoms like us, and I just thought it was so fascinating that it's like, okay, God, we talk about the Bible says we're made in the image of God, right? And so I think we've talked about it a little before I think the purpose of life is to learn and to grow. And that is you can almost say that's the purpose of consciousness, is to learn and grow. But as we learn and grow, so does the divine, right? It's constantly being opened up to new possibilities through us, which I thought was just a fascinating concept there.
And then it's also important to remember, or to keep in mind, that anytime we're talking about something like this, it's easy to get fixated on the macro, the big picture, the God. But this is also equally talking about us as the microcosm, which means, and this is part of esoteric knowledge or whatever you want to call it, the cells in our body subconsciously objectively react to our subconscious. Meaning that if you walk around as the Solar Logos thinking that you're fat and worthless, your body responds accordingly and says, okay, we're fat and worthless. And so on and so forth. You have the ability to change yourself through your thought, and your body responds to that. And so everything we're talking about here, again, we can get fixated on the macro part, but we can apply it equally to both ourselves, because the atoms within ourselves, our world, we're always learning. We're always sending out our sphere of influence to try to figure things out through our own agents. And so this applies to both sides. And that's the part I find fascinating, is to remember that as above, so below, as within, so without. The reconciliation of the macro and the micro is one of our goals. So that's it's neat, because I feel like my brain is split in half, and it's processing both of those scopes because they're the same thing. It's just that we're at different scales.
Yeah. And Bill asks, so there must be galactic logos, solar logos, planetary logos, wouldn't that be?
There is.
Dion Fortune doesn't go specifically into that, but I happen to think that you're absolutely right, Bill, because if you think about, and I think I mentioned this before, what is a solar system? Well, it's kind of like a galaxy in miniature. And what's a galaxy? Well, a galaxy is like a universe in miniature, right?
Atoms are like galaxies, and all the electrons orbit them like solar systems. Yep. But she does kind of go into, there are planetary spirits, and we haven't hit that part of the book yet. We're going to talk about the Lords of Flame and the Lords of Form, which are planetary spirits.
Yeah, and we'll get there. That is a little further along. So, and actually, Dion Fortune, not Dion, John Michael Greer mentions it here that, it is implied here, of course, is the idea the Solar Logos learns and grows. It's a god of this solar system. We'll see a little later on where the other beings worshipped by polytheist religions come from and how they relate to the Logos. But neither it nor they nor any other beings in Fortune's vast metaphor exist in a static condition of perfection. Right? Everything is learning, growing, exploring new possibilities. And as Chris just said, so are the cosmic atoms, us, the divine spark that is us. And so we talked a while back about the patterns, the tracks in space, right? These are these patterns that are set in motion by other things, and then it's, once those patterns are put in place, it's easier for us to follow them. It's one of the reasons why Bill says the Russian doll analogy. Yep. But it's one of the reasons why if you, things like AA work, they've set a track in space that has that's shown success in this particular endeavor. And if you follow that same track, right, with the same sort of zeal, you can achieve the same results, because you're following in the footsteps of people who have already blazed that trail for you. And so, let's see here. So the first thing to note is in the beginning that consciousness is a very simple form, and it is through all of these interactions that consciousness learns to grow and develop, and then as Chris sort of said, right, those things would be useless without memory, right? It is the remembrance of what happened when we followed those paths, right, that lead us to new ideas. Without memory, as Chris said, everything would be new. And if we didn't have memory, you wouldn't necessarily be learning because you wouldn't know what's new and what's old. Let's see here.
So are we in chapter 11 now?
Are we in chapter 11 now? Chapter 11 is not very big.
It's the evolution of consciousness. So chapter 10 is the beginning of consciousness. Chapter 11 is the evolution. And we've kind of been talking about how consciousness has begun, and now it's starting to evolve itself.
Yep, you're right. We are in chapter 11 now. So as I just mentioned, as a divine sparks ripen and engage in further epigenesis, right? This exploring of consciousness, they develop a personal subconscious, right, based on the things that influence us. But the logoidal, the logos consciousness remains as a deeper background to their acts and awareness. So if you want to John Michael Greer calls upon a turn of phrase from Carl Jung, where he calls these the personal unconscious and the collective unconscious, respectively. So the personal unconscious is our subconscious, and the collective unconscious is the solar subconscious. And that the implication, as both Jung and Fortune would have agreed, is that the collective unconscious that humans experience is identical at its deepest level to the mind of God. It's kind of an interesting turn of phrase there. And then we start talking about what is consciousness, right? That's one of the things that a lot of, when we were talking earlier about the science and the religion aspect, a lot of times they sort of shy away from what is consciousness. Dion Fortune does not. She actually, gets a little into what is this thing that we're calling consciousness. And she starts by pointing out that consciousness does not belong to the cosmos, right? It's not a reaction of the cosmic atoms in and of themselves. It does not originate from and return to the logos. It's a modification that affects the logos and the divine sparks, and it is the first such modification that comes into being as a result of the conditions in the solar system as distinct from the cosmos which it came. So very specifically, she says consciousness is those tracks in space, right? And so if you remember the last chapter, we were talking about movement is consciousness, right? This is what she's talking about. These tracks in space are the development of consciousness, which is how the cosmos got started in the first place. And so the same principle gives rise to the solar system. But of course, there's a difference of scale there, right?
Uh-huh.
And so, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, and if we think about for a moment, movement is consciousness. Movement does not exist without evil, right? The evil is the springboard that is used to propel us, to make us, enable us to move. So therefore, without those difficulties, there would be no movement, and without any movement, there's stagnation, and there is therefore no consciousness.
Yes. Another difference there is that when the cosmos started, right, it was started in empty space. There was nothing else for it to interact with. It wasn't until it filled that space that things actually started to collide with each other and create the complexity that we all deal with here. Let's see here.
And another point while you're looking something up, something to meditate upon or think about, when you mentioned it, it's talked about in chapter 11, and you mentioned it earlier. Man is created in God's image. Now, when we read that, a lot of people therefore assume that God looks like we do. In fact, a lot of the racial tensions that exist today came from that very statement in the Bible, where people say, well, God looks like me, therefore if you don't look like me, you're not from God, you are abhorrent, or whatever. I've heard that many times. It's disgusting. But what does that mean? We were created in God's image. Does that mean physically? Does this mask that we're wearing is created in God's image, or do you suppose it might be something else inside of us that was created in God's image? Could that be saying the microcosm and the macrocosm? Could that be saying that our inner solar system matches the outer solar system, and that you are created in that image? So there's something to pause and think about for a little bit.
Yeah, and one another thing that John Michael Greer brings up here is that it's all tracks in space, right? But within the context of a solar system, there's a point to drawing a distinction between tracks in space that have a cosmic origin and tracks in space that originate within a solar system as a result of the actions of things that have a cosmic origin. And the distinction is in fact drawn very often. We call things of the cosmos by the term spirit, and things of the solar system matter. You know, the divine spark and then the physical. And then between these lies a third kind of thing, which again originates within the solar system and is also a matter of tracks in space. So as a cosmic atom reacts to something and that reaction leaves a track in space that continues to flow, even when the cosmic atom is doing something else, right? So that ongoing flow is memory, right, that we were talking about earlier. So reaction follows reaction, and more tracks in space are formed, and memories flow together into patterns of movement, right? And we can kind of call those patterns of movement thoughts and images. And over time, the cosmic atom or the divine spark within us starts to develop a very rich set of movements, a rich network of these tracks in space, expressing all sorts of different potentials that we have gained the understanding of. Johnny chimes in, the esoteric he-who. Adam and Eve were united like God with the divine masculine and feminine, and the Hebrew word for rib could have been mistranslated from meaning part when Eve split from Adam. That's interesting. I didn't know that.
This is why I tell people it's important to learn one of those languages and to actually go look at those texts at their source. I learned that, I don't know, 25 years ago in a world religion course where we had to look at Dead Sea Scroll sources and translate with help. I obviously don't speak Greek or Hebrew, but the differences between the English translation and what we were coming up with in class I will never forget that. It was one of the reasons why I lost religion for a while, because the Bible as we know it and the Bible as it was originally written are two different things, and that caused a great schism in my own brain.
Well, I'm always fascinated by word etymology as well. Like, what's the actual origin of a lot of the English words? And it's always fascinating to look back and see what some of those things were, because you realize that, oh, well, a lot of the words you're saying don't really mean what you
Uh-huh.
thought they initially mean, right?
Even
They have
letters.
a
Even letters. So
yeah.
the Latin capital H, that looks like a fence, doesn't it? That's because that derives from the Hebrew letter ket, which is basically half a fence, and that character means fence.
Bill says that recently happened to me in translating.
I'm sure it did, and Bill. Yeah, Bill knows Greek, or I'm not sure the
Yep.
level of Greek, but I know that Phil and Bill are working on some things, and Phil's working in some Greek texts. So, and they do that. We pull up these translations of the original versus what's the translation. And we see how dirty it. And when I say dirty, I mean just how different that the English version is.
Yeah. So at the end here, the unfortunate sort of talks about, we have the divine spark, or the spirit, the soul. You have this network of tracks and space surrounding it, which is the mind, and the specific repeated movement patterns the divine sparks acts out at any given time is its body. And so John Michael Greer gives sort of a metaphor of, if you think about the divine spark as a single point of light, right? And that point of light is tracing out, say a triangle. That point of light is the spirit. The triangle that it's making is the body, and all of the possible movements. So if we could go from a triangle and into a square and into some crazy something else, right?
3 into 4.
All of the potential movements, right, are is your consciousness. It's the potentiality of life, and those make up, who we are, the soul, the mind, and the body.
Mm-hmm.
And that's chapters 10 and 11.
And bearing in mind that who we are, and we were actually just posting this on a different website, and Bill was a part of this conversation. We look at the Lover's Tarot, and there's a triangle in the Lover's Tarot, and there's an angel, and there's two people. Who we are, who we really are, is not this. Like, this body we have, even our personalities and the things we know, like intellectually, are not who we really are. They are an accumulation or a mask that we wear throughout this form. And then when we die, that all dies with us, and the spiritual component is what lives on. So as you move through your different lives, you're going to take on different personalities, different masks, basically. And those are all part of the experience.
Yeah, I think the funny metaphor I heard was, it's like a person who puts on a gorilla suit and goes and hangs out with a bunch of gorillas and then starts to think, oh, I'm a gorilla.
Right.
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 The who we are today is the gorilla suit. Right. The soul is what's actually inside, the thing that can take off the suit and put on a new suit.
Yep.
Because we need all of those different experiences, to grow our consciousness, to learn, to move beyond, what we do here on the earthly realm.
Right. And in esoterics, we call that the person versus the man. The person is this. The man is who we are, really.
Yeah. So whenever you see text talking about like the higher self, that's usually what they're referring to. Is they're referring to the spiritual element of who you are.
The genius, the holy guardian angel. Some older texts will even say that's God. So because you are a part of God, therefore your holy guardian angel, which is you, is God technically. So therefore, you don't have free will. You are guided by God. That's yourself. And if you try to deviate from that, bad things usually start to happen in your life. As one thing I have studied recently. Do we have any other questions in the chat before we go ahead and wrap this up?
Bill's typing.
Bill is typing.
Oh, like a video game. You control the player.
Right. The avatar.
That's a very interesting metaphor there, Bill. Yes, you're controlling the avatar, but that's not you.
The avatar's
right.
Not you. You're sitting here playing. The dude in the screen is. He thinks he has free will. He's a little sim walking around.
That's more Russian nesting dolls there. You've got the consciousness of the soul playing in the body, which is now playing a video game.
He's a dude pretending to be a dude. That's another dude.
Inception.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Do we have anything else before we wrap up? All right, then. So we will resume in a couple weeks, I imagine. We'll put out an event for it. And Chapter 12 is the beginnings of mind. And this is where we start to see how minds start to evolve. And then after that, we start to see how divine sparks start to evolve. So highly recommend you read ahead, Chapters 12 and 13. Come in prepared with some questions if you have any. But otherwise, hope you guys have a good Halloween. Everyone stay safe, and we'll see you, a couple weeks or so. Take care.